Greetings and felicitations.
Hip, hip, hurrah! Tally-ho!
Here we go, another special edition of Star Pod Trek. On these special editions, we break down either an episode or a movie. Pick it apart, reconstruct it. We see, does it stand the test of time? How does it fit in with the rest of the Star Trek universe? And also, are there any other adaptations of the work or any links, whether it be comics or books? So again, my name is Nayar.
And I'm Kavora.
And we're going to go deep into Star Trek, the motion picture that came out in 2009. Self-titled Star Trek, oftentimes called Star Trek Reboot or Star Trek '09. Have you ever heard of any other terms that's used for that?
Something like the first JJ movie.
JJ Trek. Well, normally we break down the movie, but this time we're going to have to talk about the comic books first. I thought this was a stroke of genius to release a series of comic books to get us ready for the movie. A 4-issue series by IDW Comics entitled Star Trek Countdown, the official prequel to the upcoming motion picture.
So these came out how long before the movie?
It came out months before the movie.
Okay, several months.
That was the idea of once a month you're able to read the story that led up to the movie. The story is by Roberta Orci and Alex Kurtzman, writers Mike Johnson, Tim Jones, artist David Messina.
So the story, again, it's by the same people who wrote Star Trek '09.
Yes.
Which is excellent. Okay.
Cover date January 2009. And when the whole idea of this, well, they asked, is this really canon? Because that's what we want to know when you see something that says on the cover, the official prequel to the up-and-coming motion picture. How do we view it? Do we view it as canon?
I like to think it is, yes. Now, like Robert Orci was asked if it's canon, and he said, well, I don't really want to say if it is or not. But I would say it is until if they ever contradict it, but they haven't so far. I mean, it's a great story that explains what happens up to the movie, and it explains some things that you see in the movie, like why the Romulans look the way they do, which is one of the biggest complaints about the movie.
And also why the ship that jellyfish ship just miraculously appears out of this vortex. I consider this, if you're going to rewatch the movie, this is a must-read. And they make the trade paperback edition. We have the originals, but the trade paperback editions are usually pretty easy to find at any bookstore or comic book store. 4 issues. Wow. Answered a lot of questions that the movie brought up. Number 1, what was the motivation for Nero to hate Vulcan so much?
The movie did state that Romulus was destroyed, but here you get to see the whole story of how it happened and Nero's part in it and Spock's part in it. It's a really good character story. I mean, just like what Star Trek is known for.
It takes place 8 years after Nemesis, so we're understanding the timeline is what we would call Next Generation era, Deep Space Nine era, Voyager era, what have you. It's of that timeline. The uniforms that they're showing in the comics are the ones that are reminiscent of Star Trek Online.
They used Star Trek Online, which I'm not as familiar with, but since I've seen people cosplay those costumes, I recognize them in the comic. And they're really sharp looking too. So, those would be nice uniforms to actually see. I
love it when they tie in canon issues and try to make the universe cohesive.
It is good. Yes, tying it into something. Well, I mean, Star Trek Online is not really considered canon either, but it's been used in a few things. Star Trek, other fans have used it, other stories.
But it takes place after Nemesis, and it's a natural progression of that era, so it makes sense.
It is, yes. Because it's the same timeline.
And the timeline that these comics take place in has Data as the captain of the Enterprise.
Yes, and that was great. And that's another thing about this series, because it uses familiar characters, Data and Picard.
And also Geordi LaForge. It gives us insight that Geordi, the whole idea was Spock started living on Romulus, realized...
Which we know.
Yes. And so that's the setting of it. It takes place there. And he's saying, look, there's going to be some celestial happenings here where we've got to evacuate this planet. And no one believed him. He was trying to And they were saying, well, he's just a crazy Vulcan. And guess what? There was some cosmic phenomena that proved him right.
And Nero also knew about it, and Nero stood up for Spock in front of the Romulan Council.
Mm-hmm. Nero was a miner, and he was looking at the data, not data, commander data, but looking at the data that was compiled and said, there is some truth to this. And Nero was had a wife at home. He had a newborn child. He wanted to make things better for his future family. So we see there's a strong motivation there of Nero being a professional miner. He and his team wanted to do what was right for the planet and his family.
And we see that Nero and Spock were friends at first, which makes the story even more bitter to find out that, that they became enemies and that Nero turned and hated Spock in the movie.
Yes. And they were pleading with the Vulcan government for the technology that they had found, this red matter, because the red matter could help thwart this disaster on Vulcan.
Yeah, the red matter was used in the movie. So in these comics, we find out that it was actually the Vulcans who learned how to put it to use. Mm-hmm. So, which is the irony, because that's what was used to destroy Vulcan.
And it was this unique ship that was able to go into this black hole and be able to use this matter in a way to divert the atrocity from Romulus. That was the idea.
That's what they were trying to do. And well, the star went nova before they were expecting.
Yes.
And so that's why there was, like, nothing had been done yet before it went nova, so they couldn't stop it. And then I think it also turned out to be a bigger explosion than they thought.
And what was interesting, that the Romulans ended up having unique technology that they fused with the Borg. That's why that ship that we see in the Star Trek movie looks so drastically different, is because it's a combination of Romulan technology and Borg technology that they let Nero use.
But these were Romulans that survived the destruction of Romulus, because there were a few that survived, right? There was there were these groups that were that were not on the planet. And they did manage to save the the Romulan Senate, the people that were higher up. They were saved from the explosion because they got off the planet on time, like just in the nick of time.
The reception of this comic was fantastic. Most stores were saying that within 2 weeks it was sold out. They had to reprint the first issue as a 100-penny edition. And it's interesting, unique note that issue 3 came out the same day as the iPhone. So there was a big buzz in the Star Trek world and technology world that day. But in order to really understand the movie and the motivation, seeing that why Nero was so passionate about vengeance is because he pleaded with the Vulcans to let them use technology, and they said no to him. He and Spock had pleaded with the Vulcan High Council to do something about this epic event that was going to happen, and they ignored the scientific facts. So now there's a strong motivation, and we see the comic series ends with them both going into this black hole. And that's pretty much how the movie started.
The movie started with Nero coming through the black hole.
Correct.
And to him, he was going into the past, also into a different universe, but but since it started out, the comic started out in the time after Nemesis, 8 years after Nemesis. Now, when we pick up in the movie, it's the time, right when Jim Kirk is being born.
Correct. So you're looking at roughly 100 years past. So he went through a different time, as well as a different timeline, and also it was Geordi LaForge that was supposed to ride the Nemesis, ride the jellyfish, but
the jellyfish was the ship that Spock was in. They
correct.
called it a jellyfish.
Yeah, and Spock said, "Look, you still have a bright life ahead of you. Let me do this. This might be my last thing that I can ever do." Because
Spock knew that it might probably, most likely, it would be a one-way trip. He didn't think he would survive.
Reading this helped us to understand the movie so much better, because it gave real motivation to the characters, and it actually set the movie up and made more sense to a whole bunch of things that the movie didn't address.
Exactly. And another thing, too, was that it explained why the Romulans were bald and had the tattoos.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Which had to do with, because all their families died. After Romulus was destroyed, they said what their tradition is to shave their hair and to paint their skin, to
show a sign of mourning.
That they mourn the loss of their loved ones.
And so Nero knew that this was permanent, so he went and got his paint tattooed on him.
Yes, they said the paint usually wears off, but Nero knew that it would be permanent, so he wanted his to be permanently on.
Captain, we're being hailed.
On screen. It's the Narada. Fire! We need more power.
I'm gonna get all she's got, Captain.
Brace yourselves!
With BK Kids Meals, you can create your own space adventures with sound-making toys from the new Star Trek movie. One toy per kids meal. Now with stars and bolt-shaped chicken tenders. Limited time only.
Captain, we're being hailed.
BK Kids Meals, now with Star Trek toys.
So getting into the movie, well, the comic series was better than the movie, I think.
Yeah, both of us, we saw the movie when it came out. Do you remember your viewpoint of the movie, or what was it like anticipating the movie for you back in 2009?
Oh, the anticipation was pretty high. Yeah, I was excited to see the movie.
The casting calls came out first. The first one that I really remember being excited about was when they cast Spock, because I was a Zachary Quinto fan from the show 24. And I said, wow, this guy really is going to be a fantastic Spock. He looked like him.
The only actor they announced that I was familiar with was Carl Urban, because he played Caesar on Xena, and then he also played another character. Julius Caesar. Oh, and Cupid on.
Oh, he played two characters on there?
Yes, he did.
I was familiar with him from Lord of the Rings. So he was an actor that had some background to him. Chris Pine was cast as Captain Kirk. John Cho, Ben Cross, Bruce Greenwood, Simon Pegg, Winona Ryder, Zoe Sell, Dana.
No, of course, Winona Ryder. I mean, I don't think I was expecting her in this movie, but yeah, I mean, I know.
But
she's
they really
done other
gave
stuff.
her big billing, and she wasn't in the movie hardly at all. Anton Yelchin, Eric Bana, and Leonard Nimoy were the all-star cast. Music by Michael Giacchino. Cinematography by Dan Mindel. Distributed by Paramount Pictures. The budget was $150 million. They took in $385 million in the box office.
And also, this movie was made. It was pretty much right after the split, when they split Star Trek between. The movie, Paramount would own the movies and CBS would own the TV shows and everything else. Because the thing I noticed was that when a new company got the movies, when Paramount got the movies, the first thing they did was make a new movie. Whereas before they were just sitting on Star Trek. So finally now they've done something with it. And it sounded like a good idea at the time.
Mm-hmm. And they brought in J.J. Abrams, and he had some background with science fiction, written by Roberta Orci, Alex Kurtzman. We realized that this was going to be a reboot to a degree. Do you remember at first we couldn't figure out if it was going to be a reboot starting from the beginning? It was kind of a fuzzy area. What was it going to be exactly? And they were being hush-hush from the beginning of what exactly this movie was going to be like. And it was simply titled Star Trek.
There were rumors that it would be another Starfleet Academy. Well, I don't mean another, but just because that had been an idea before. Mm-hmm. That was one of the rumors, and so we never really knew, but we did know beforehand that it would be about Kirk and Spock, that it would have the original characters, not the Next Generation characters, and so forth. Yes. And we did know that Leonard Nimoy was going to be in it.
And we knew that they were going to be using the classic colors of red, gold, and blue.
And I think the reason Leonard Nimoy agreed to do this is because he was offered a lot of money for it. Mm-hmm. I mean, also, but but I've heard him talk before. He doesn't really take a part unless he thinks it's a significant part and that it's important to the story. So they also wrote a satisfactory script for him to do it. Mm-hmm. And his part was good in this movie.
Yes.
So getting down to it, I think when I first saw it, I did enjoy it, but it was still, I wasn't quite sure if it was really what I wanted from a new Star Trek.
I was frustrated.
Yeah, like you didn't like it right
people
off.
People that I went with are like, it's kind of it's too much action.
It was, yes. And when we did the rewatch recently, that was when I noticed. Yeah. Then it was more obvious. Like there's just so much happening, not as much story, but that was intentional. That was the way they wanted it to be a more action-oriented movie.
They said two things. They redesigned the Starship Enterprise because they wanted to make it appealing to younger people. So they made the nacelles bulbous. It almost looked like an anime cartoon. They redesigned it to a degree. They put a ton of phaser banks on it, so when the Enterprise was shooting, it was shooting on all cylinders, kind of like a Star Wars ship.
Shooting from different places on the ship.
That
right?
we normally would see it from. And the idea was, well, we need to get the Star Wars crowd into Star Trek. And you know what? I love Star Wars, but I love Star Wars for its own reasons. I love Star Trek for its own reasons. I love pizza. And I love apple pie. I don't want to combine them. They're two different things, and you could respect them as two different things. So it's kind of frustrating. I call it the dumbing down of Star Trek when you put that much effort into action and in special effects and not as much into dialogue. Because to me, that's what made Star Trek so different from all the other science fiction franchises, is the dialogue.
And the talk in this movie was it was just to carry the story, to keep getting back into the action.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, there's no way around it. That's what they feel is what today's audiences want. I'm glad that I grew up in the era that I did grow up in then.
So I do think that, now Zachary Quinto, I wasn't really familiar with his work before this movie. I thought he did a good job. I think he and Leonard Nimoy were the best ones in it. And Spock was always my favorite character. And I think, now one thing about J.J. Abrams, he said that he liked Spock, and that's the reason he kind of wanted Spock to be more the focus of this. Mm-hmm. So, that was the best thing going for it. And even if Zachary Quinto had some emotion, I think it fit the movie, showing when he decided to turn down the entry into the Vulcan Science Academy, and right at the end of that scene when he said, "Live long and prosper," and the way he said it, he said it like, I hate all you people. You know what I mean? And then getting into the fight when he was provoked by Kirk, getting into that fist fight when he hit him, and that. Yeah. You couldn't really see the old Spock doing that in the original.
No, of course not.
But it fit the movie, and I could see it here, and it was okay.
You just have to realize it's a different timeline. They've tooled the character so drastically, and that was one of the motivations with the writers. They said, "Look, we need to change all the characters in Star Trek so that the casual fan will get into it. The casual fan does not have the history that we have. The casual fan is not going to watch 700 episodes of a TV show and read all the books and read all the comics." So to a degree, I could see why they did things the way they did. At least they made it a different timeline. At least they didn't insult our intelligence by saying, well, this is the prime timeline. This is just another aspect of the character that you haven't seen before. So knowing that, I'm able to accept it for what it is.
That was a smart move, doing that, saying this is like an alternate universe. I mean, as far as making it for the casual fan, well, I wish they could do both. I wish they could satisfy both sides. If if you could find some way to find that middle ground to satisfy us who have been watching it for 50 years, but you still want to draw new people in. Of course, we still want people to see this who might not have enjoyed any other Star Trek show. We hope they would enjoy this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really the established fans that are still going to carry Star Trek, and they will try to, bring as many friends into it as they can.
Mm-hmm.
That is probably the best way to go. If you don't satisfy the fans that have always been there, then how is it going to survive?
That is true. Some interesting things that came up with regards to this movie is the fact that Simon Pegg didn't audition from the role. J.J. Abrams asked him if he would. And Simon Pegg is a big Star Trek fan. So it's nice to know that you had someone involved on the crew that really loved Star Trek. That really
liked it. And he even he wrote a script, right? Didn't he write the third movie?
Mm-hmm.
So he was really into it.
Yes. Massive amount of security when they were filming it, because this started back in 2007, the ball started getting rolling, and they weren't allowed to walk off set with their uniforms. Because remember, there was some photos that leaked out of the uniforms, because we were wondering, what are the uniforms going to look like? Are they going to have the collars like in the Cage, or are they going to be Wrath of Khan style? But then once some of the photos got leaked out and we saw colors, it was pretty exciting to know that we were going back to that time period, even if it's an alternate history.
So I think that, and Ben Cross as Sarek, he was okay. He was kind of wooden. And you look at, because now you can compare it to Sarek on Discovery, and you think there's so many more layers to the one on Discovery. Of course, he's been in so many more episodes. He's had a lot more screen time, and they've made him more emotional. But he's more of a well-rounded character, I think. And then in this movie, we don't really get to see him much. But he just, he's the one who's not emotional, while Spock is a little bit more emotional.
Yeah, speaking about actors who are playing the part of one of the classic characters, we look at Kirk and the new version of Kirk. I think they just went too much with making him a hotshot and carefree.
This Kirk was nothing like the other Kirk. I think William Shatner's Kirk was an upright citizen. He was
balanced.
Never this wild.
He took chances, but he took chances in the right way.
They said at the Academy he was a stack of books with legs. So the young Kirk, we think, was very responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And even you watch him on the show and you think he's a ladies' man, but he's still, he didn't act like a jerk with the ladies, somehow you get that impression with this Chris Pine Kirk.
It was too much. It was like, even Fonzie doesn't act that way. It was like he was almost a caricature.
A caricature?
Or
a teenager.
It was just weird.
And the way he acted during the Kobayashi Maru, where even if he did change the conditions of the test, but for him to just sit there.
He was too flippant about it.
Yes, and act so casual about it.
Yeah, this film was totally made for an extremely... If I was 8 years old, I would have loved this Star Trek. They did make some toys for the show, but it was a financial failure. Of course, Star Trek historically struggled, with the exception of the Playmates line. Star Trek always has problems with distribution, making the toys fun, interactive, and they didn't do a good job with the action figure line on this. But if I was 8 years old, I probably still would have had some of the action figures for it. I know that Zachary Quinto tried real hard to do the Vulcan salute, and he wanted it to be done perfectly, so he had them glue his fingers together. He was dedicated.
Really?
He really wanted to make this right.
Yeah, I think he did, yes. And after this movie came out, I was expecting more novels, like that would be set in this setting. But the only thing they did was they did the novelization of the movie, and they never had other books for these characters for this timeline. I was kind of expecting that, and so I guess the reason they didn't do it, though, was because it wasn't really successful enough to do that.
Oh, I know the books, let's see, the novel line, they didn't have the rights. Because,
Okay, yeah, because it was owned by a different company.
That's right, yes. The novels only had the rights outside of the adaptation. The novels only had the rights to use the prime timeline with the classic characters that we know. They didn't have the likeness rights to do a whole series of novels. But IDW did have the rights to those characters. And they wanted to make they used the standard like they did with the Countdown comic. Until it breaks canon, it is canon. And so that little green man that was with Scotty in the movie, the comics named him Kinzer. And so later on in the Kelvin Timeline movies, and that's what we should be calling it, Kelvin Timeline.
Which they didn't call it back then, but that's what we call it now.
Yes. They didn't think about it. Hey, wait a second. Everybody keeps calling this JJ Trek. Well, now they adapted that character's name from the comics into the movies. We have all the comics of IDW, and they're great reading. I have to say, they did a good job with taking that aspect of the expanded universe and making some sense out of it. That being said, looking at the cinematography of it, what do you think about those lens flares?
I mean, I really never noticed them until other people started talking about them. I don't know why I don't notice that kind of thing. And honestly, even in Discovery, people complain about the lens flares. I still didn't notice it for a long time until you finally reminded me that they're there, and then I noticed them.
I almost need sunglasses sometimes. This one was really nuts, because when JJ was reviewing the movie, his wife was sitting next to him saying, "Do me a favor, calm down with that." So his wife told him to calm down with it. That's why we really don't see it in the Star Wars Force Awakens.
Yeah. Okay.
But this movie came out 10 years ago. We're recording this in 2019. This is the 10th anniversary of the movie. And the visual parallels to this in Star Trek Discovery are uncanny. And some might say, well, that's modern movie making. Really? 10 years? This is a 10-year gap. I'm sorry. Discovery does look like it fits in the Kelvin timeline, with the twisting cameras and the lens flares and the constant aura of blue. I remember them calling the new Enterprise the Apple Enterprise because it looks like an iPhone. Everything is white and blue.
And the movie had Alex Kurtzman, who was now working on Discovery, and I think some of his influences there. I think he wants it to be similar, just to carry on his contribution to Star Trek. And it's not all bad if it does have some of the same looks, but we're being told that Discovery is in the prime timeline, which would mean it would not be in the Kelvin timeline. So you would think that they wouldn't want them to look alike.
Yeah, it's a strange idea. We're not going to talk about Discovery now. We're talking about this movie. But since they do look similar, that adage of, well, that's how modern movie and modern things look. Well, no, I'm sorry. We watch the Lost in Space Netflix show. That doesn't look like that. We watch the new Star Wars movies. That doesn't look like that. They don't use shaky cameras. They don't have So I'm not buying into this that Discovery... that's how all modern sci-fi movies look. No, that's not how all modern sci-fi movies look. It's a strange parallel why they make it look like the JJ movies. I don't get it, but I'm still going to watch it. But this set the standard for a very unique look in comparison to all the other Star Trek movies before it.
It's very different from the other movies. They were... Well, it looks more advanced too. It looks like has more advanced technology, but of course it was made well after the TOS movies and well after the TNG movies.
I did like the chrome when Sulu was moving forward.
The lever.
I like that
when
lever.
He moved that
yeah,
lever
that was sharp. Yeah, some of the technology I really liked in there. That was pretty good looking. And
I have to say the relationship with Spock and Uhura, I didn't really buy that either.
Again.
And now we've heard people say that there were hints of it on the original series. We know there was the time that Uhura was talking to Spock and said, tell me what your planet looks like on a lazy night when the moon is full. And I mean, there was that. And then the time that she was somewhat flirting with him when she was singing and kind of making fun of him in this song she was making up.
I never got a relationship out of that.
I didn't either. Now some people say they did though, but I didn't. And
whereas I liked it with Uhura and Scotty later on. I think that made more sense.
A little bit, because they're both sort of joking personalities and everything. But even in the context of this movie, it just, yeah, I don't know why I just didn't buy it in this movie.
Yeah. So we rewatched it for the sake of rewatching it, but I can't imagine the next time I'm going to watch it again anytime in the near future.
Well, let's just say we both like Carl Urban in this movie, right?
He's
yes,
we forgot to talk about him. He did an incredible job of channeling Dr. McCoy, not imitating him, but really having the feel of how DeForest Kelley would react in situations like that. So there's certain things you can't blame the actors for. It's the writers. They're only going to read the script and apply it to the best of their ability. Zachary Quinto, fantastic job. Carl Urban, excellent job. Just his attitude, his how gruff he was. And he's a Star Trek fan. We got to meet him on the cruise, and he's a huge fan.
Yes, and that was great seeing him. When I first saw him in the movie, though, I still thought that he looks like Gary Mitchell. I was thinking, no, he should have played Gary Mitchell, because that's just who he happens to look like. Mm-hmm. But he did do a great job as McCoy in this movie. I loved him as McCoy.
So, it's a Star Trek movie. We reviewed it, and there's actually some Star Trek comics that adapt the movie and a follow-up to the character of Nero. So let's find out more about those.
Trade you my Nero glass for Uhura. Not in a million light years. Klingons. I think you want your BK Star Trek glass. No way, it's a collector's item. The Klingon nipple pinch! Take it! No. Here! They took Uhura. They took my nipples.
Star Trek movie glasses, $1.99 each with any BK value meal. Collect them all before the Klingons do.
One thing that I did enjoy about this era of IDW Star Trek comics was the fact that they were producing a lot of material that tied into the movie. We already discussed the Countdown comics, but then they made the official adaptation of the comics that ran 6 issues. And normally the fun thing about reading the adaptions is seeing if they show something different that wasn't in the film. Oftentimes the adaptions are based on the script as opposed to the finished product. But these adaptions were very close to the original cut. Even some of the cinematography that was outlined in the comics matched the movie. Didn't you notice that?
Yes, and so these were actually made from the movie, we could, from what we can tell. And they stuck very close to the movie. It was almost word for word.
Whereas the series that came after that, Nero, was a 4-issue series. And it was virtually the same creative team. We had Roberta Orci and Alex Kurtzman penning the story. The writers were Mike Johnson and Tim Jones. The artist was David Messina.
It was probably the same team that did all 3 of these sets of comics, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So to keep the consistency and everything, and it worked pretty well.
It did. I like the fact that this told the story of Nero from before the movie and then after the movie, and gave us some of the scenes that apparently were clipped from the final edit. So we're able to paint a picture of what Nero's life was like.
And this was a very interesting story, the Nero series. So the movie tells us that Nero and his ship, that they were waiting in the alternate timeline for 25 years before Spock came through. And, you know, so when I'm watching the movie, I'm led to believe that he and his people are just sitting there in that ship for 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But according to the comics, no, there was a lot that happened to him.
We see that the Klingon Empire is active during this time period. Now, the first time we saw Klingons in the Kelvin timeline was in the second movie, correct?
Correct.
But the comics show that they're very active during this time period. So we see that the Klingons actually captured Nero.
Yes, and it makes sense that the Klingons would be there. According to the Star Trek lore, they have been around for, before we saw them in the episode Errand of Mercy. And it's interesting, they had a Klingon named Kor in this, and we don't know if it's the same Kor.
But we could assume that it's going to be the Kelvin Timeline's version of Kor.
Okay.
That's what I took out of it.
It could be, but Kor could be a common name to the Klingons. And they made him look like the Next Generation Klingons instead of the TOS Klingons. And
so Nero is actually captured and tortured.
And taken to Rura Pente. So we know that, that prison colony still, exists in this timeline. It's still a prison colony. It's where people are taken to work, and it's a frozen world.
So this was one of the early glimpses of what would go on in the Kelvin Timeline universe, how they would take elements from the Prime Timeline and show the Kelvin Timeline's version.
And it was good to see that, the references, because that's what we like to see. And the comic books do that a lot, and I've always enjoyed that.
And Nero was not wasting his time in prison. He was using his time to hone himself mentally as well as physically for those decades. He still had on his mind that he was waiting for Spock, but at this time he doesn't know when Spock is going to come through. So for all he knows, Spock could already be there somewhere, but he knows he's going to at least look for him when he gets out. And so he's in this Klingon prison, and he doesn't speak. That was another thing. Mm-hmm. His crew was there, and they spoke because the Klingons tortured them, and they gave away Nero's name. And the Klingons know that Nero is the commander. And they keep trying to get him to talk, which he doesn't. And he meets, let's see, for one thing, there's one alien here was it a human that was providing him with a drug? Mm-hmm. Because that was important. So this drug makes him a telepath. So we find out that Romulans do still have some latent telepathic abilities, which they seem to have lost on the series. We know the Vulcans can still perform the mind meld. They still have telepathy, but the Romulans, we never saw any Romulans with telepathy. But now Nero has taken this drug that enhances his telepathic abilities. So I wonder if there's something that they're really focusing in on the Kelvin timeline. I mean, the Kelvin timeline, we realize it's designed for the Fast and Furious crowd. It's designed for young people that want things hyperactive and superpowered, extremely fast. So if they're going to add a superpower to a Romulan, this is the timeline to do it, as opposed to the Prime timeline.
Yes, well, also they have time to explore more, because this was a part that wasn't in the movie. So it was an idea they had, and another thing, because making him a telepath made him able to communicate with his ship, which
seemed a bit far-fetched to me.
Yeah. No, the Klingons still had the ship. It was orbiting Rura Pente, so it was nearby. It was in proximity, so we don't know how far his telepathy goes. It may only reach that far. But yeah, to communicate with the ship, and the ship had never, like we never had any evidence that that someone could control it telepathically or communicate with it like that or anything. But they try to explain it by saying it's partly a Borg ship, and maybe their technology allowed that. Mm-hmm. And the next thing, Nero meets in prison the one that was a stellar cartographer, and somehow
yes.
Yeah, so the stellar cartographer was talking to AL, that was the name of Nero's second in command, and she says that he could probably help Nero, and so he goes and introduces himself to Nero, and Nero does decide to let the man help him because this person, was his name Clavel, he could actually look at the stars and try to predict when Spock would be coming through the wormhole. Mm-hmm.
And they do find Spock. And this is the part that I actually really enjoyed, because in the movie, Nero says that he puts Spock on the planet so that he can have a view of Vulcan being destroyed, but now we're seeing the details of it.
Yes, so they do escape from the planet and go back to where they know that Spock will enter their universe and capture him and take the red matter and take him to, was it Delta Vega, the frozen planet he actually explains in this movie, the orbit of that planet for a time comes close to Vulcan, so that Spock can be on that planet and see the destruction of Vulcan. And that part, you know, when you're reading the comic, you don't feel as much for Spock in this because he's not the main character in this one. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have the same emotional impact saying that he's going to make Spock suffer emotionally and mentally in this way.
Yes. He gives them enough supplies to last there for weeks. He said, because you're going to need it. You'll be able to breathe, but we're setting you up so that you can see your world destroyed.
Yes, and then leave him stranded on the planet, even though they know he can still live because there's a Starfleet post there. Which
the movie didn't explain that. We just see him on this ice planet, so we don't know how long he's there.
No, the timeline is sort of broken up. We don't know, but then we didn't really need to know exactly. But yeah, that was something that wasn't really.
So that's one
known.
thing out of the comic series that we read so far, the Countdown, which I very much enjoyed. The adaptation didn't give us too much more information, but the Nero one did. And I think that's the benefit of reading the comics along with watching the movie, because the comics have more time to flesh out the story, and they're looking for more of the diehard fans. We appreciate the nuances of the story like this.
And one more thing in this story, it also has V'ger from Star Trek the Motion Picture.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
That was so cool, yes. And V'ger actually helps Nero in this one. Mm-hmm. But it's another entity that, I mean, just like it was in the motion picture, looking for, well, he doesn't say it's looking for the creator in this one, but it's looking for something for meaning, for another being to be able to communicate with. Mm-hmm. And Nero does know that it comes from Earth, but he does seem to accept its help because it's helping him. That was what was helping him control the ship, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. So that was something else that he needed and he used, and it was just cool to see it in these comics. And they actually they had the artwork that was just like what we saw inside V'ger in the movie.
So going forward with the Star Trek series from IDW, from this point on, they start retelling classic original series storylines, but with the characters in the Kelvin timeline.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.